You know the exact loop we're talking about. The room goes quiet, you're lying awake in the dark, and suddenly your brain decides to replay the absolute cringiest moments of your entire life. The awkward fumble from last week, the joke that completely flatlined, or that utterly embarrassing thing you said 3 years ago that you would pay real money to forget. It's like the audience is a packed courtroom sitting right inside your head. And you're the defendant, and you are never, ever allowed to rest.
But here is the massive plot twist. Nobody else ever saw those original fumbles. That audience, it lives entirely inside your skull.
Okay, let's dive into this. If nobody is actually watching, why do we perform for them anyway? Why do you stockpile activities, queue up endless podcasts, and mindlessly scroll social media, doing absolutely anything to drown out the playback before it gets too loud? Today in this explainer, we're going to map out exactly what the science actually says about this internal courtroom, where the popular psychology goes just a bit too far, and what this all means for your actual day-to-day life.
So that frantic need to drown out your own internal playback, it literally has a clinical name. It's called experiential avoidance. Basically, it's our deeply human tendency to avoid uncomfortable thoughts and feelings, usually by desperately grabbing for a distraction. This is the whole psychological backbone of your drown-it-out routine. You scroll, you listen, you work, all just to suppress the nasty emotion of that mental replay. Sure, it gives you short-term relief, but honestly, in the long run, it just keeps the cycle going. And science shows us exactly why we are so incredibly desperate to escape our own heads. Let's look at the numbers. One famous study found that a wandering mind occupies about 46.9% of our waking hours. That is almost half of your day. And crucially, the data shows that all this mind wandering typically makes us less happy. To put this into perspective, when researchers asked people to just sit alone in a room with their unstructured thoughts for just 6 to 15 minutes, participants generally did not enjoy it at all. They strongly preferred doing some kind of external activity. In fact, they disliked the quiet so much that in one really striking finding, 67% of men and a quarter of women actually chose to give themselves a self-administered electric shock rather than sit with 15 minutes of quiet thinking. Just let that sink in for a second. They literally preferred physical pain to sitting alone with their own unstructured thoughts.
Now, actually, scratch that, we do have to be precise here. While the initial conclusion was that people chose pain simply to flee aversive thinking, like, desperately escaping that embarrassment replay, later researchers actually contested this. When they reanalyzed the exact same data, they found that on average, participants actually found just thinking somewhat enjoyable, and a majority preferred thinking to the shock. The shocking behavior of the minority was heavily driven by curiosity and sensation-seeking, rather than just fleeing distress. They were simply curious about the pain. But the broader finding absolutely holds up. Sitting alone with an unstructured mind can still be remarkably uncomfortable for a lot of us.
And that brings us to a really fascinating concept called idleness aversion. Experiments show that people genuinely dread being idle, but we have this funny little quirk. We need a justification to be busy. Without a reason, people will actually just sit there and be idle. But if you give them even a weak, completely specious justification, they will immediately choose to make themselves busy. And this brilliantly illustrates the result of that busyness. In these studies, busy participants reported higher happiness than idle ones, even when that busyness was entirely forced upon them. This right here is the empirical core of why you stockpile activities. A lot of the goals you pursue might simply be justifications to keep yourself busy, because a busy body keeps the quiet mind away. But why is the quiet mind so loud with judgment in the first place? Well, that's due to cognitive biases, starting with the illusion of transparency. We vastly overestimate how much other people can read our internal states. Studies show liars overestimate how detectable their lies are, and we overestimate how visible our disgust or embarrassment is to the room. You feel the absolute heat of embarrassment leaking out of your pores, right? But they just see a neutral face. That massive gap between what you feel and what they see is the whole problem. Closely related to this is the spotlight effect. We constantly overestimate how much other people notice our actions, our mistakes, and our appearance. This is the very backbone of the audience inside your skull. You're utterly convinced the spotlight is glaring right on your fumble, but the truth is, everyone else is entirely focused on their own internal spotlights.
So how does this actually work mechanically? Well, these biases operate in this rigid, predictable loop. First, you anchor on your own intense, vivid experience of the moment. Then, you try to adjust for the fact that others might not care as much, but you underadjust. You just don't go far enough. So you're left assuming total, painful visibility. You basically trap yourself in the illusion that everyone is watching your every move.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is where we separate the internet pop psychology from the actual hard science. You'll often hear people online say, nobody else ever saw those fumbles, the shameful exhibit never even existed. Look, that is a therapeutic hallucination. The empirical reality, which is completely supported by the literature, is about underestimation. They noticed less, not nothing. The audience isn't a complete hallucination. It's just massively exaggerated by your anxiety.
So you stay busy to avoid this exaggerated audience, but busyness is actually doing double duty here. Research shows that in contemporary culture, a busy, overworked lifestyle has actually become an aspirational status symbol. It signals capacity. It signals importance. So your frantic life is a performed signal to real people on the outside. At the exact same time, it's acting as a private defense mechanism against the quiet on the inside.
And that is the grand loop. A wandering mind that feels worse, a busy body that keeps the quiet away, a room full of constant input, and the internal replay still just sitting there, waiting whenever the input stops. The quiet can feel like a life sentence, but it is absolutely vital to understand this. A wandering mind is not a broken one. It is just really, really hard to sit with. The cage you feel trapped in is built mostly from the echo of what you feel they saw, not what they actually saw.
Let's move to acceptance and see how this builds into real, practical solutions using acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. The goal here isn't to magically eliminate the discomfort, because you can't. It's to build your tolerance for it. When you feel that sudden urge to grab your phone to escape a cringy memory, try this. Set a 5-minute timer. Name the feeling out loud. Literally say, I am noticing embarrassment. Then practice urge surfing. Treat the urge to distract yourself like an ocean wave. Just notice it rise, peak, and fall without actually acting on it.
A core part of this is cognitive diffusion. Instead of getting tangled up in your thoughts or trying to toxically suppress them, which by the way we know just makes them bounce back way stronger, you create distance. If the thought is, I sounded so stupid, you simply add a phrase to the front. I'm having the thought that I sounded so stupid. It instantly transforms the embarrassment replay from a terrifying reality back into what it actually is, just a string of words floating around in your head.
The practical truth isn't that everyone completely forgot your fumble. It's that they likely remembered far, far less of it than you did. And honestly, that is a much more usable, grounded truth than pretending nothing happened at all. When the silence arrives, notice the ghost of judgment. Acknowledge it's there, then remember, the ghost is real, but its body is often far smaller than it felt.
You actually have the power to stop performing for a courtroom that is mostly empty. So I'm going to challenge you. Next time the room goes quiet and that mental playback starts queuing up, let the silence arrive, just for a minute. Wait before you immediately reach for that infinite scroll. See what actually happens when you just sit with the echo. So, the crucial point is that your attention is yours to command once you truly realize the audience isn't really watching. If you want to keep taking back control of your attention and learning how your mind actually works, hit subscribe. Make it a conscious choice to multiply your true engagement with the world, rather than just stockpiling more distractions. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you in the next one.